The forest was unusually quiet that morning. Mist clung to the underbrush like breath on glass, and the trees stood motionless, as if holding their breath. A faint rustle broke the silence, a sound too soft for a predator, too deliberate for the wind. From the shadows emerged a bobcat, her fur matted and her eyes wary. She moved with a limp, favoring her left hind leg, a fresh wound glistening against her tawny coat. Each step was measured, pain evident in her gait, yet determination drove her forward. Suddenly, a sharp, high-pitched screech pierced the air. The bobcat froze, ears twitching, eyes scanning the canopy above. Another screech followed, this one more frantic. She tilted her head, pinpointing the source, a small downed owl chick, its wing twisted unnaturally, flapping helplessly on the forest floor. Predators don't usually show mercy, but something in the bobcat's gaze softened. She approached cautiously, the owl's cries subsiding into whimpers. The bobcat sniffed the chick then, with surprising gentleness, nudged it upright with her nose. The owl blinked, dazed, but remained still. The bobcat lay down beside the injured bird, curling her body protectively around it. They remained like that for hours, the forest resuming its chorus around them. As dusk approached, the bobcat stood, nudging the owl gently. With great care, she picked up the chick by the scruff of its neck, a gesture typically reserved for her own kind, and began the slow journey back to her den. Each step was a testament to her resilience, her injured leg dragging slightly, but her resolve unwavering. The den was a hollow beneath a fallen tree, lined with leaves and moss. She placed the owl gently on the soft bedding, then settled beside it, her body forming a warm barrier against the encroaching night chill. The owl, though still in pain, nestled into the warmth, its eyes closing in exhaustion. The bobcat kept vigil, her ears attuned to every sound, her eyes scanning the darkness. In that moment, predator and prey became protector and protected, bound by an unspoken understanding. Days passed, and the bobcat continued to care for the owl, bringing its small prey and sharing her warmth. The owl's wing began to heal, its strength returning. They communicated through gestures, a nudge, a chirp, a purr, forming a bond that defied nature's conventions. The forest watched in silent wonder as this unlikely pair navigated their shared existence, each finding solace in the other's presence. One morning, the owl attempted to fly. It flapped its wings tentatively, lifting off the ground for a brief moment before landing clumsily. The bobcat watched, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and sadness. She knew their time together was nearing its end. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the owl took flight, soaring above the treetops. The bobcat followed its ascent until it disappeared into the twilight. She returned to her den alone, the space beside her empty, yet her heart full. In the heart of the forest, a wounded bobcat and an injured owl found each other, their lives intertwining in a dance of survival and compassion. Their story serves as a poignant reminder that even in the wild, where survival often trumps sentiment, connections can form in the most unexpected ways. The forest had begun to thaw under the weight of spring, and though the trees still held the brittle memory of winter in their branches, the undergrowth had started to pulse with life. Tiny shoots emerged from the earth like secrets rising to the surface, and the air was damp with promise. It was in this awakening world that the bobcat moved. Slower now, her limp more noticeable with each passing day. Her wound, though scabbed over, had grown stiff, but she never strayed far from the hollow under the fallen tree. Inside, the owl chick waited, no longer just a foundling, but something more. The den, modest and earthen, had transformed. What was once simply a place of shelter now held a quiet rhythm. The bobcat bringing back scraps of meat, the owl chirping softly when she returned, its downy feathers fluffed in anticipation. There was no spoken language between them, but something deeper passed through the glances and gestures. A watchful eye, a low purr, a shift in position to make room for the other. The owl had begun hopping on one leg, stretching its wounded wing cautiously. testing its limits in the soft space of their home. Above the den, life moved on. Hawks soared in the gray-blue sky. Mice darted through fallen leaves. The forest had no interest in miracles. It only demanded survival. And yet, in that quiet hollow, a miracle was taking shape. Every time the bobcat turned her body to shield the owl from the wind or stayed awake through the night, when rain threatened to flood their home, she did something no one would have expected. She cared, and the owl, with each small flutter and every wide-eyed gaze that followed the bobcat's movements, responded with trust. Occasionally, a sound in the distance, like the crack of a twig or the heavy rustle movement, would cause the bobcat to rise sharply. Her ears would twitch and her body would tense. She was still a wild thing, wired for instinct and wary of what lurked beyond the visible. But each time, after scanning the woods and reassuring herself of their safety, she would return to the den and curl around the owl again. It was becoming habit, a role she had not chosen but one she now accepted. One afternoon, as golden light filtered to the forest canopy, a storm threatened at the edge of the horizon. The sky dimmed unnaturally fast, clouds pressing together in a heavy curtain. The owl, restless, chirped and shifted in the den, wings twitching as though sensing something was coming. The bobcat emerged briefly, sniffing the air. Thunder growled low and distant. She didn't hesitate. She moved quickly through the undergrowth, ignoring her aching leg, gathering leaves and bramble to reinforce the entrance to their shelter. The first drops of rain fell like cold fingers through the branches. By the time the wind picked up, the bobcat had returned, soaked and panting, nudging the owl deeper into the hollow. They huddled together, the storm pressing against the world outside. Lightning flashed. Thunder cracked. But inside the den, two very different creatures clung to a shared space, warm and still. After the storm, the forest smelled new again, earthy, rich, and damp. Steam rose from the ground like breath, and birds emerged hesitantly to test the sky. The owl was more active now, testing its feet outside the hollow for the first time. The bobcat followed slowly behind, her injured leg dragging just a little more. She didn't interfere. She only watched, eyes alert but gentle, letting the owl hop toward a mossy log, balance itself, and stretch its wings wide for the first time since the accident. There was a moment of silence. Then, without fanfare, the owl leapt, only inches at first, and landed awkwardly in the brush. It looked back at the bobcat, blinking. The bobcat took a step forward, then stopped. The owl didn't need help anymore, not in the same way. That realization settled in her bones like the cold, but she didn't resist it. Time in the forest is not marked by clocks or calendars, but by growth, by healing. And both the owl and the bobcat were healing. The owl's wing now moved with greater range. Its movements had become confident, its gaze sharper. The bobcat's wound, while still present, no longer slowed her. She moved with caution, yes, but no longer with pain. Her fur had begun to grow back over the scar. She even hunted again, sometimes watching the owl attempt its own small pounces on beetles or leaves. It was clumsy but determined. Then came the morning when the owl was gone. The bobcat woke alone. There were no sounds from the back of the den. She sniffed the moss, still warm from where the owl had slept. Her eyes moved to the entrance, ears forward. A beat of silence. Then a shadow passed over the mouth of the hollow, a flutter, and then a perch on a low branch just outside. It was the owl, watching her. She stepped outside, slowly, cautiously, as though not to startle it. They held each other's gaze for a long moment. Then, with a chirp barely audible above the rustling trees, the owl flapped its wings and glided down. Not far, just to her feet. It hopped once, tilted its head, then brushed against her leg before taking off again, circling the clearing in a wide, swooping arc. The bobcat watched it go, not with sadness, but with something deeper, acceptance. She turned back toward the den, but didn't enter. Instead, she climbed onto the log near the entrance and lay down, eyes half closed, soaking in the golden light. She knew the owl would return. Or it wouldn't. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that the forest was no longer empty. Something had shifted, and even in silence, she could feel it. The bond between predator and prey, forged in pain and patience, still hung in the air like the last drop of rain before dawn. The forest had resumed its rhythm. Leaves whispered secrets to the breeze. Insects buzzed in lazy patterns. The stream nearby chuckled over stones worn smooth by time. But for the bobcat, something essential had changed. She no longer moved as if alone in the world. Her every step, every glance, seemed to acknowledge an absence, but not one filled with sorrow, more like a memory she carried under her skin. Each morning, she rose with the sun and scanned the treetops. Her ears twitched at every distant flutter. Occasionally, she'd spot a silhouette far off, an owl-shaped blur gliding past canopy. But she made no move to follow. She understood now. Some bonds weren't meant to be caged. They were felt in the pauses, in the silence between two heartbeats. Then one afternoon, as the light filtered in sharp beams to the high branches, she heard it. A distinct, familiar chirp. Not frantic, not fearful. Just there. She lifted her head from the patch of sunlight she'd been dozing in and looked toward the old log. Perched casually atop it, almost as if it had never left, was the owl. Taller now, stronger. Its feathers had filled in, and its eyes burned with sharp clarity. The bobcat rose slowly, careful not to startle it. She stepped forward. The owl didn't move. In fact, it tilted its head and blinked, that old gesture of familiarity. Then it did something the bobcat didn't expect. It hopped down from the log and landed beside her. It didn't chirp. It didn't flap. It simply stood beside her in the quiet. From that day forward, the owl came and went. Sometimes it was gone for hours, even a full day, but always returned, landing with quiet confidence near the bobcat's den or brushing the ground near her paws. They no longer needed constant presence. Their bond had matured. It existed beyond proximity. What the bobcat didn't realize was that something else had begun to change, something beyond her control. One morning, she caught a scent in the wind. Human. It was faint at first, masked by the dampness of the forest floor. But it grew stronger as the days passed. Boot prints began to appear in the mud near the stream. The familiar quiet of the woods became interrupted by faraway mechanical hums and snapping branches under heavy footsteps. She didn't recognize the sounds, but instinct told her they weren't good. She became cautious again, circling wider around the den, her ears constantly alert. The owl sensed it too, on more than one occasion. It returned in the middle of the day, unsettled, wings fluttering and eyes darting. It would perch above the den and let out a series of sharp, short hoots, not in greeting but in warning. Then came the day the men arrived. It was late afternoon. The air had that stillness that only precedes disruption. The bobcat heard them before she saw them. Two men in forest uniforms, their voices low and clipped. They moved with purpose, sweeping the area near the stream, pausing to examine tracks in the soil. One of them held a tablet. The other had a long pole strapped to his shoulder. She watched from a distance, her body low in the underbrush, breath silent. They hadn't found the den. Not yet, but they were close. The owl, hidden high in the trees, was silent. The men returned the next day, and the day after that. They marked trees with ribbons. They installed trail cameras. One morning, the bobcat returned from a short hunt to find a strange plastic scent near the hollow, a motion sensor, blinking faintly red. She didn't understand what it was, but she knew it didn't belong. That night, she didn't sleep. The owl came and sat at the edge of the den, unusually quiet. The forest felt heavy, threatened. Then it happened. 2 nights later, under the cover clouds, the bobcat heard movement, fast, purposeful. Flashlights flickered in the dark. Voices whispered orders. They were looking for something. For her. She bolted silently from the den and circled behind them. The owl, startled from a nearby branch, swooped low to draw their attention away from a log. It chirped loudly, erratically, fluttering toward the trees. One of the men looked up and followed the movement. The other moved forward toward the den. The bobcat didn't think. She rushed forward, letting out a low growl and baring her teeth, her body low and coiled. The man froze, startled by the sudden presence. But he didn't run. Instead, he lifted a tranquilizer gun. Before he could aim, the owl dove. It wasn't a large impact, but it was enough. The owl struck the barrel with its talons, throwing the aim wide. The dart whizzed harmlessly into the brush. The man stumbled backward, raising his arms in defense. The owl flapped wildly, circling back to trees. The bobcat took the chance and vanished into the dark. They ran for hours. The owl stayed above, guiding from the air. The bobcat didn't stop until the scent of the men had completely vanished from the wind. Finally, they found shelter in an old hollow beneath a broken pine, miles from the original den. The bobcat collapsed, her breath labored, her injured leg throbbing. The owl landed beside her, wings trembling, feathers ruffled. They lay there in the dark, side by side, surrounded by damp pine needles and the pulse of their own survival. They didn't sleep much that night, but they didn't leave each other's side. In the morning, the forest was quiet again. A new part of the woods, new trees, new sky, but the bond was the same. The danger had passed, for now, but something had been learned. They were no longer just two creatures who shared a shelter. They were family, and they had chosen each other. The new part of the forest felt older, thicker. Sunlight had to work harder to get through the dense branches, and the ground was soft with layers of fallen leaves and ancient moss. This wasn't a place many animals ventured unless they had to, but for the bobcat and the owl, it was now home. Not by choice, but by necessity. The world they'd known, the hollow beneath the log, the familiar trails near the stream, was gone. The humans had claimed it with cameras and boots and blinking red lights. But here, in the heart of untouched wilderness, they were free again. And yet, things weren't the same. The bobcat's leg had grown worse from the escape. The mad sprint through rough terrain, the sleepless night, and the cold, damp earth had all taken their toll. She limped more now. Her muscles stiffened quicker. At times, she collapsed sooner after a hunt, breathing harder than usual. The prey here was scarce. Everything in this part of the forest was more cautious, more practiced in survival. It took longer for her to find food. Sometimes she returned with nothing, but still she hunted. Still, she fed the owl first. The owl, now nearly full-grown, had become a capable flyer. It disappeared for hours at a time, soaring over the treetops with confidence. It began catching its own insects, even a field mouse once, clumsily but successfully. And yet, it never stayed away for long. Each evening, just as dusk settled into the roots and trunks, the owl returned. Always, it would land near the bobcat, settling beside her, and preen her fur gently with its beak, a grooming ritual not native to its kind, but one learned from love. But as the owl grew stronger, the bobcat weakened. She hid it well at first. She rose with the same routine. She patrolled the forest's edge. She watched the sky when the owl flew, but her strength was fading, and her eyes, once fierce and sharp, had begun dull around the edges. There were nights she didn't rise at all. She curled into herself and slept deeply, shivering as the cold crept through her fur. The owl, sensing the change, began staying closer. Its flights grew shorter. Its eyes lingered longer. One evening, the bobcat didn't wake for a long time. The owl sat beside her, motionless, its head tilted. It chirped once, softly. Then again, there was no reply, only the rustle of the wind in the high branches. The owl stepped closer, nudged the bobcat's shoulder gently. Still nothing. Then, after what felt like forever, the bobcat stirred. A shallow breath, A slow blink. She tried to rise but faltered. Her leg gave out beneath her, and she slumped back to the ground with a quiet groan. The owl didn't leave that night. It stayed beside her, wings folded tightly, head low, eyes blinking slowly in the dark. It brought her a small piece of bark with berries on it. She didn't eat it. The owl didn't try again. The next morning, the bobcat rose, barely. She made her way to a shallow stream a short distance from their resting place. Each step was slow, painful. The owl followed from the branches above, silent. She reached the water's edge, lowered her head, and drank. Her reflection, him in utter stillness. He froze. But the animals didn't move. There was no threat in the air, only curiosity. He took one cautious step forward, then another. The owl tilted its head, but did not fly away. The bobcat's tail flicked once, lazily. The boy stopped a few feet away, lowered his voice to a whisper. "Are you hurt?" He looked directly at the bobcat, then slowly knelt and removed something from his bag, an apple and a plastic container of cooked chicken. He set them down gently on the moss. The bobcat didn't approach, but the owl fluttered over, landing near the food. It pecked at the meat, then looked at the bobcat as if asking permission. The bobcat gave a slow blink. Permission granted. The boy remained there for some time, cross-legged on the ground, talking in soft tones the way children do when they speak more to feel than to be heard. He didn't try to touch either of them. He just sat, watching, offering, witnessing something even he didn't fully understand. Eventually, he stood, leaving the rest of the food behind. As he turned to leave, he glanced back one last time and smiled, not a wide grin, but a quiet, knowing expression, as if he'd stumbled into a secret and was grateful to carry it. That night, the owl remained beside the bobcat, who didn't rise. Her breathing was soft, shallow. She looked at the cabin once, then closed her eyes. She was tired. The owl nestled close, laying its head against her chest, listening to the slow rhythm beneath her fur. And then, in the deep hours of the night, something subtle shifted. The bobcat stirred, not in pain, not in fear, just moved, as if feeling a breeze no one else could feel. Her body eased, and she let out a long, steady breath. The owl lifted its head, chirped quietly, then fell silent. A new kind of stillness settled. In the early light, the owl sat alone in the clearing. It didn't fly. It didn't cry. It simply remained beside her, watching the forest wake. And then, as if guided by instinct, it stood. It looked at the cabin, then the trees, then the sky, and it flew. Not high, not far, just to a nearby branch where the sun touched the leaves. From there, it let out a long, low call, not a warning, not a cry, just a sound that echoed gently through the woods. It was the kind of call that doesn't ask for an answer. It simply says, "I remember." Hours passed. The owl stayed nearby. Occasionally it flew off, then returned. The clearing remained quiet. The child came again, days later. This time with an adult. They approached slowly, silently, and when they found a bobcat, they paused. The woman knelt, brushed her hand lightly over the fur. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Together, they cleared a space beneath the tall pines and laid the bobcat to rest in the softest soil. The owl watched from the same broken window frame. When they left, the clearing was undisturbed, peaceful again. That night, as the stars pierced the black sky, the owl flew higher than it ever had. It circled the valley once, then twice, and then soared beyond the ridges into the trees, carrying something invisible but weighty in its wings, a memory, a bond, a love not bound by kind or shape. And the forest, that ever-watching keeper of wild truths, remembered too. The seasons turned quietly in the forest. What had once been a tangled cradle of urgency and survival slowly gave way to a softer rhythm, one where time did not rush, and memories settled gently into the soil like fallen leaves. The old cabin remained, weathering wind and rain, a structure leaning into time, but still standing. Its broken windows caught the light on some mornings, scattering sunbeams across the clearing where the bobcat had last rested. The owl had stayed. It didn't stay because it had nowhere else to go. It stayed because something within its feathered chest still pulsed with the echo of her brushing against feathers, of a low purr in the cold, of a bond formed not by species or instinct, but by something far more rare, choice. Every morning, it flew above the trees, gliding effortlessly to the same canopy it had once fallen from, broken and helpless. Now it moved with grace, with strength, each wing beat a silent tribute to the creature that had once carried it from death's edge into life, but always returned, landing on that same weathered log near the cabin, blinking into the light, waiting for nothing in particular, just being near the place where its story had changed forever. The child returned, too, now older, taller. His visits weren't frequent, but they were steady. He would arrive with a backpack and sit cross-legged in the clearing, sketchbook in hand, drawing the owl from different angles. The bird didn't mind. It had grown used to the sound of a pencil scratching against paper, to the way the boy would speak gently about his week, the way he'd pause sometimes and look at the old pine grave with a thoughtful expression. Once, during an early spring, the boy brought seeds. He planted wildflowers in a circle around the tree roots. They took hold quickly, blooming in soft shades of blue and white. The owl often nestled there, feathers ruffling the breeze as petals brushed against its wingtips. Years passed this way, slowly, silently, beautifully, and then, one day, something new happened. Another owl appeared. Not a chick, not quite. Young, but already skilled in the air. It flew with cautious curiosity, circling the clearing, then landing awkwardly a few feet away from the older owl. It stayed only for a moment, then took off again. But it returned, again and again, days later. There were 2 sets of wings in the sky, 2 shadows gliding together across the treetops. The forest had gifted the lone owl a companion, not to replace what had been, but to continue what had begun. The older owl never abandoned the clearing, but its flights grew longer, its calls less mournful. It showed the younger one the quiet corners of the woods, the safe places to land, the best times to hunt. And on certain evenings, as the sun dipped low and painted the forest floor in gold and rust, both owls would sit side by side on the cabin roof, their silhouettes quiet against the glow, watching, remembering, in that same light. If someone happened to pass the old clearing and pause near the pine, they might notice something else. A carving, barely visible now, weathered into the bark by time, but still there. A small paw print, and beside it, the faint curve of feather. No words, just symbols. A memory etched not in language, but in the oldest kind of understanding. The child, now nearly grown, stood there once more, eyes scanning the treetops. He spotted the pair above, both owls watching him from their perch. He smiled, then knelt near the wildflowers, brushing the petals with his fingers. His voice, though deeper now, carried the same warmth. "I never told anyone," he said softly, "about what I saw that day, about the bobcat and the owl. They'd never believe it." He paused and added, "But I remember." He stood and turned, leaving behind a fresh stone painted with careful strokes, an image of a bobcat curled around a tiny bird. As dusk fell and shadows stretched across the forest, the owls took flight again. Together, their wings caught the wind with ease, slicing through the stillness like memories through time. High above, the stars blinked awake, watching the world from their quiet perch in the dark. And far below, the forest remembered. It remembered a predator that chose protection, a prey that chose to stay. It remembered loyalty, sacrifice, and the quiet, impossible miracle of love between 2 beings who were never meant to meet, but did, because sometimes in the heart of the wild, something extraordinary happens. Not loud, not grand, just true. And once it does, it never really ends. It becomes part of the land, the wind, the silence between tree branches. It becomes legend. And if you listen on the right night at the right time, you might still hear it. A low, rhythmic hoot, a soft, careful paw step in the moss, and the rustle of something beautiful that refused to be forgotten.